Hello and good evening, everyone. On behalf of VIP Learning Network team, I would like to welcome you all for our 8th webinar tonight. As it is 9 p.m. now, I think we need to rush a bit for our presentation tonight, for which we are already looking forward to. So before we start, I would like to hand it over to my colleague Osman for the opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. And thank you very much for joining us on this 8th edition of our webinar series. And it's extremely pleasure for us to have you all here at the time of Ramadan. And if you are joining across the other parts of the world, we are happy to have you here as well. As you know, in collaboration with Dicle University and Uludağ University in Turkey, we organized this session with the support from Regional English Language Office at the US Embassy, Turkey. And it's kind of exciting to share and say that this is the one right before the last session. So we are kind of sad to see this is coming to an end. But who knows, maybe we will come back for another year. That being said, I am very excited to have you all here today with two amazing scholars and friends who are going to talk about the potential of using culture and cultural resources in world language classrooms. So thank you, Özge Hocam, for moderating this one.
It is a pleasure. Thank you for this nice updates. And yes, let's say that, like, keep an eye on our social media accounts. So there will be 9th webinar coming soon. And I can see that we have a lot of participants tonight, more than 200 participants. So I think we are all really looking forward to the webinar. And I would like to introduce our first speaker for tonight. So our first speaker is from Bandırma 17 Eylul University and Sezen Arslan. So she is an assistant professor in the School of Foreign Languages at Bandırma 17 Eylul University, Turkey. Her research interests include foreign language teacher education, specifically focusing on cultural awareness in language classrooms, assessment and evaluation, and sustainable development. So, Sezen Hocam, the screen is yours, and welcome again. Thanks for being with us tonight. We are really looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you very much for this nice introduction. Now I want to share my screen. And by the way, thanks for your nice invitation, Dicle University and other stakeholders. So, okay, I think now you can see, right?
Yes, everything looks perfect.
Great. Okay, today I will talk about culture in language learning and teaching. But believe me, I won't bore you at all with the theoretical information because I'm sure that here there are so many followers, there are so many people, I mean participants who will be English language teachers, hopefully in the very near future. So I want to give some practical implementation, some practical activities, because once upon a time I was an English language teacher. I worked for 6 years in MEP schools, in primary and secondary school. So I know actually that practice works. But of course, we need some kind of theoretical information, but practice is the most important one. Okay, my content will include those dimensions. I will first start by global spread of English, and then I will move on to word Englishes. I will talk about culture in ALT, intercultural competence, and I will show you some examples. And at the end of the presentations, I can have your questions. Okay, so let's talk about the global spread of English. Actually, when we look back to the 17th century, when the Queen Elizabeth I and the II lived, the number of the speakers of English actually was roughly, 5 to 7 millions. And then actually at those times, the population increased to 1 billion. because of migrations to America, Australia, and New Zealand. And actually here, America's slavery trade was also very influential. So the population of the speakers of English directly increased because of these, reasons. And of course, politics, cultural exchange, travel, trade, science, for example, like Erasmus programs, like some, cultural exchange programs were also playing very vital role. And then those concepts actually appeared: English as native language, English as a second language, and English as a foreign language. Those concepts actually are very important because sometimes they can be, interchangeably used. So let's see. English as native language actually refer to speakers whose mother tongue is English, like the UK, the USA, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And for the ESL, we can say that the speakers whose mother tongue is not English, but they were born and raised in countries where English is the official language apart from their native language. For example, Singapore, Nigeria, Bangladesh, India. For example, in India, okay, you can speak your Indian language as your native language, but when you go outside to do some, things and stuff, for example, in a governmental building, it means that sometimes you have to use English as your second language because it is the official language. But when it comes to Turkey and Russia, in our case, let's talk about Turkey, English is used as a language for trade, education, but here the official language and, the native language is Turkish. So we don't actually have to use English for doing our business or for doing trade, etc. But just one very major difference, actually, I want to talk about it. English is the only compulsory course. For example, we have French, we have Italian, we have Spanish, we have, other kind of foreign languages, but English is the only compulsory course, and it is mentioned in the legal documents of Ministry of National Education in Turkey. So it may be beneficial to know this actually facts, know these, differences. So we have these circles actually, and at the very core, we have inner circle, English as native language speakers. I mean, we have native language speakers here, native speakers. And now we have the outer circle, English as second language speakers. And in the expanding circle, you see it is expanding, and it is still expanding. The numbers of ESL, ENL, and EFL speakers, are increasing day by day because of English, because English is given importance. So, and then we have this concept, word Englishes. We don't say word English, but we say word Englishes. So as you see, it is plural. Actually, this concept is not new. It appeared in 1991, but it's not that important actually. But here, this concept is very, very important. It's very vital because of the globalization and the rapid improvement of the technology. So let's think about COVID-19 pandemic. For example, it appeared first in China, but then it directly impacted all of us because we travel. We go and come to different parts of the world with just one flight or with two flights. Here, for example, just 24 hours is very, very short because in just 24 hours, you can directly go to a different side of the world. You can be in the one side of the world in just 1 hour, and maybe in the following hours, you can be in the different part of the world. Maybe this can be a butterfly effect. So globalization is at the very heart of the globe, actually, the world, let's say. So English is not spoken by just, England or Britain, let's say, or the USA. So we can say that English is spoken by 1/6 of the world population. That means non-native speakers outnumbered native speakers. So this is very incredible, actually, unbelievable. And as a result, we cannot talk about a standard form of English. We cannot say, for example, please speak with a British accent, or please speak with an American accent. There is no such a thing actually anymore, or at least this is my humble opinion, let's say, but as the literature shows, this is the case. It's because English because English is not the commodity, is not the thing of native speakers of English anymore. English is an intermediary language. It means that it is the word language. So it is the medium language here. So Indian people speak it, Mexican people speak it, Polish people speak it, Russian, Turkish people speak it. So actually we cannot talk about just one culture because this is the result of English being in lingua franca, English being the word knowledge. So here we see the role of culture in language teaching. So this brings us the cultural thing, cultural stuff in EFL classrooms or ESL classrooms. So culture is a very part of the language, but we cannot talk about just one single culture. So we should go from local to the global. Yes, maybe in the beginning of 90s or 50s, let's say, or between 50s and 90s, yes, culture was just a subject. And culture was a thing that belongs to only target culture. So British culture was taught, American culture was taught. But now, as the English is lingua franca, we should give place to cultural diversity, cultural complexity, cultural hybridity. So we need target culture, definitely. We need native culture. And we need interculture. So we need all of the cultures all around the world, we can say. And actually, this presentation will be based on the Bayram's intercultural communicative competence model because it includes all of the cultures. I say cultures because we don't need just, American or British culture, but we need to know all of the cultures because we need diversity all around the world. So we should know, or we should teach our students knowledge of cultures, skills of interpreting and relating, skills of discovery and interaction, critical cultural awareness, and finally, attitude. So these are just theoretical, actually, dimensions, but I will explain it with some examples. So this is the knowledge part. The knowledge of social groups, the knowledge of social products, cultural practices on one's own culture and foreign culture. For example, Ramadan Bayram is or Ramadan as a religious holiday is the cultural information. This is just the cultural knowledge. So if I have this knowledge as for example, Mexican person, then yes, I have this knowledge. And this is just the knowledge, For example, this activity, I take it from Skills for Success textbook. It says, look at the names and dates in the box. Listen to the information about the word game Scrabble. Yes, it can be it can seem like a very simple activity, but it's actually very rich activity in terms of culture. Maybe we can ignore sometimes those parts. And here, in the box, there are some dates and there are some names. Alfred Mosher Batz invented the game of Scrabble, blah, blah, blah. So here, actually, we have such a cultural knowledge, even in this activity, because the learners unintentionally or unconsciously, let's say, they try to learn or they have these names in their minds. So this is a cultural knowledge activity. Of course, you can talk about religious holidays or maybe national holidays or maybe some other cultural knowledge, but this is just the knowledge. These are this is the information that the students can memorize, or these are just names or dates. But culture is actually beyond it. So we need something else. For example, skills of interpreting and relating. So what is interpretation? If we think of the triangle, yes, the cognitive triangle, cognition is at the very basic of the triangle. But interpretation, inferencing, so they are more than just memorizing or just knowing the things. You have to work your mind and you have to interpret the things. So how can we teach culture? By making our students interpret the things or relating the things to their own culture. So here, actually, we should want our students to interpret the events from their perspective and the other's perspective, because we should look through the other's lenses towards culture. Let's see the example. For example, here there are two speakers, and this is the conversation among them, between them. Where are you going? Why are you asking? It's none of your business. So as you see, it's not a very positive conversation. Or are you coming to teach class? What a dumb question. You know I am. Oh, you are back. You are going shopping. You can see I am back, or I am going shopping. What is the point of stating the obvious? Have you eaten? Why? Do you want me to invite me for dinner? If not, why would you ask that? So as you see here, these questions are not very positive, or we cannot talk about a very positive conversation here. For example, are you coming to teach class? What a dumb question, what a silly question, you know I am. So most probably these speakers are from different cultures, or maybe they are from different, countries. And most probably this is from the Orientalist culture. For example, it could be even a Turkish speaker, because we sometimes ask some, empty questions. For example, knock, knock, who is this? We say Ben, for example. Who is Ben? Who are you? Okay, I know that it is you, but I'm actually, asking the question, or are you coming, or have you come, or have you eaten something? So these questions can be sometimes blank, or can be sometimes empty. We just ask maybe for showing that we care about you, or you are important to us, but these questions don't have a purpose. Actually, these are just questions, just blank questions. So even if these conversation and these statements actually show the cultural differences, as a Turkish person, I can understand this speaker, the intention of this speaker. And as a maybe Western cultural person, maybe an American or a British person can understand the intention of that person, the end speaker here, because our perspectives are different. But we should understand each other, so no one should offend the other, because yes, we just use our own windows to look through the world. I'm asking you, have you eaten? Because I want to show you that I'm caring for you. But the other person say, why? What is your point of asking this question to me? Actually, by watching this video, you can understand me. You will understand me. Believe me. In this video, there are two people. One is from Ireland, and the other is from Germany. And let's see the differences.
Would you like a slice of cake? Oh my god, that looks delicious. No, I couldn't possibly. No, stop. Be a little bit naughty. No. Okay, take it. Fine, you're forcing my hand. Okay, fine, I'll take it. Kuchen? Ja, bitte. Bitteschön. Dankeschön. Kuchen? Oh my goodness, that looks delicious. No, I couldn't possibly have a slice of it. Wait. Would you like a slice of cake? Oh, yeah, bitte. Oh, okay. You're very confident. Rude, really.
So actually, this reminds me the Turkish people, especially in the east part of Turkey. Yes, generally, actually, we are like this, but especially the east part of Turkey, people always insist on, offering food, and the other person that is being offered food just say, no, I won't eat it. I don't. Okay, then, yes, I can take one slice. So, the Irish people are like us, like Turkish people, let's say, but German people, they are very strict, or the person say, oh, you are very confident and you are very rude because I'm offering you the food. You say, okay, then that's all. You don't say, for example, I don't want to eat, or, just insist on me because that person just wants it. So this is the, cultural perspectives.
Would you like a slice of cake?
Okay, for the skills of discovery and interaction, so as the name suggests, here we should teach our students by interacting, through interaction. So we should make some activities and we should ask this question. Does the activity invite students to elicit, obtain from an interlocutor, I mean the speaker, the concepts and values of documents or events and develop an explanatory system susceptible of application to other phenomena? Yeah, I know this is very theoretical, but let me explain in simple words like this. Does the activity encourage my students to interact while they are trying to learn their culture? This is the simplest words, actually. This is the simplest word. So, write a conversation with a friend about the special days or events. Yes, my students can ask each other some questions about the special days or events. For example, they can pretend that, for example, one of them can pretend that he or she's from America, or he or she's from Mexico, and I'm Turkish girl, and we can talk about, you know, some special days or events. We can just ask questions to each other, very simple questions, and then we can fill out, you know, calendar. Or yes, completing the calendar, special days, or completing questions and writing answers about getting information about a trip for your town or city. For example, you have arrived Copenhagen, and maybe one of your friends can pretend that she's or he's from Copenhagen, and maybe she can direct you, or she can, you know, give some instructions to some touristic attraction. So this actually encourages knowledge, cultural knowledge, but as you realize, we are interacting with each other. Actually, these are not, you know, complicated things to do. We should just promote interaction and just promote learning about culture. So that's the thing. And the other dimension of Bayram's system model is the ability to make an evaluation of products and practices and perspectives critically. So here, what is the thing is that the students should, you know, learn about perspectives, should have the perspective of others, or relate the things from their own perspective. So does the activity here invite students to identify and interpret explicit or implicit values in documents and events in one's own and other culture? So we can talk about some kind of comparison here, comparison of the target culture or the other culture with my own culture, Polish culture and Turkish culture, Russian culture and Turkish culture. Yes, of course, we should compare and contrast the cultures, but that doesn't mean that offending the other culture or humiliating the other culture. So, for example, here there is an activity. One of you is Craig, the character, and the other Craig's girlfriend, Brittany. Brittany and Craig are arguing about whether or not to let their friend Danny know that they have seen his girlfriend on a date with another guy. Craig thinks it is none of their business, but Brittany insists Danny has the right to know. Act the situation out with your partner, develop the situation until you find a solution. So, and maybe as a Turkish person, I can approach this event from a different perspective. Maybe I can, you know, tell the friend that your, you know, girlfriend is on a date with another guy, and I should let you know about this. For example, this can be my perspective. Or even in actual Turkey, in this country, it can change from one region to another. I mean, the perspectives can change from the west of Turkey and the east of Turkey. So you see, there can be even some regional differences. And this is just a case. You can Google and you can find hundreds, thousands of cases like this where, you know, make use of different perspectives. Like here, for example, maybe a Russian person can approach to this event from another perspective. Maybe he or she will say that, no, we won't let him know, or this is not our business, for example. But this is the case between the Western and the Eastern cultures, or let's say individualist cultures and Orientalist cultures. So we can make use of these kind of cases or situations. And the final one is the attitude. Attitude, you know, refer to the behaviors of someone. You can be curious, you can be willing, you can be eager or open to other culture, or at least you should be like this. So here you should not have some prejudices or stereotypes, but unfortunately most of the people have this kind of prejudices, and sometimes this can be normal because they don't know. They don't know the geography, they don't know, you know, how people behave or in what situations the people live or act, you know. So here, what kind of features come into your mind when you think about Americans, for example? This is just a very simple question. And in this situation, the students will just list the stereotypes, or maybe they can eliminate the stereotypes in their mind here. Write down some points with your partner and think where your impressions might have come from. So this is just a question that addresses the stereotypes, the biases, the prejudices, let's say. Okay, for example, I want to show you a video, and it's a very funny one. Maybe it's a little bit exaggerated, but you can understand the attitude actually in a very deep way. So let's see, let's watch it.
Right. It's okay. Yep.
What?
Bad luck.
ちゃんと色々教えてあげなさいよ。What did he say?
As you see here, making noises is a sign of saying that the food is very delicious, according to their culture, according to Far East culture maybe. But most probably the man is from America, or I don't know, from a Western country. And you know, when he sees, he is exaggerating the thing. So at the end of the day, you know, there is a cultural misunderstanding between them. So in order to eliminate this misunderstanding, actually they should be open to each other. They should be open to the cultural differences, or they should know about each other. So in order to learn something, so you should be eager to learn something. Okay. So as for the stereotypes, actually, when we look at the map, yes, actually all of the countries, you know, have these stereotypes. For example, Americans, we generally say that Americans are friendly, Americans are materialistic, they drink always coffee, they are dominant, they are impatient, positive, overconsumption, extreme capitalism, etc. So they are all stereotypes. Actually, they don't reflect the realities. Or they say Turkish people are conservative, they always eat a lot of kebabs, they are tea addicts, they are smelly. So, you know, they are very offensive. And or German people drink a lot of beer, German people are stubborn, German people are punctual, cold, direct, they have no sense of humor. Of course, yes, they can drink a lot of beer, but of course there can be some, you know, German people that drink no beer. Or not all Turkish people, you know, eat lots of kebabs. We also have vegetarian people. So these are stereotypes, and these statements don't reflect reality at all. So what to do? Just bring a map to the classroom, or if you teach online, just, you know, show them map. So just, you know, just buy this, for example, this doll. It's just a doll, it's just a toy actually. So show it, this is the world, okay, and this is map, this is the map. So the whole world is not just one country, not just one region. So use maps, use images from other countries. The world is not just America, or the world is not just, you know, Turkey or Britain. There are many, maybe big countries, very small countries, and all of them have their own cultures, and people are living there, etc., etc. We can make use of reading materials from all over the world, highlight similarities. Actually, first we should focus on similarities, and we should challenge stereotypes, because otherwise the stereotypes, you know, can be strengthened, and it can be difficult to eliminate them as the time goes. For example, for Spain and Turkey, I can tell you the differences. In Spain, there is a siesta time. And during noontime, actually, all of the shops are, you know, off. They are closed, and people go to sleeping, or maybe they can have some rest. But in Turkey, actually, yes, there is a lunch break. Yes, the you know, the shops are off but to some time, and we don't actually, you know, go sleeping. We just have our lunch, and that's all. But in order to understand actually these differences, at first, yes, you can say that what is siesta time? What a silly idea it is, for example. You can maybe say some offensive words, but this is actually not very meaningful, or this is not actually a sensible thing to do, because based on the similarities, you can say that, please think about the Friday time, Friday noon time. Most of the Turkish men go to mosque and to pray, right? And actually this is like siesta time. This looks like siesta time. So based on the similarities, actually, we can try to understand the other person's perspective, or other person's, you know, ways of living, ways of behaving. So all the time, when you hopefully become teachers, be focused on, you know, similarities, and teach your students that the world is not just one country or one region. So that's all on me. I don't want to steal other speakers' time. So thanks for listening.
And thank you for your interesting presentation. It was very nice to see all these comparisons. Thank you very much, Sezen Hocam.
Thank you, thank you.
And yeah, just a little reminder for our participants, there will be a bigger Q&A session. So in the end, so feel free to write your questions for the Q&A part on Zoom platform. So I would like to move on with our second speaker tonight, who is Kristen Michaelson, and she's from the United States. And I think, yes, Sezen Hocam stopped the screen sharing, and we can see the introduction for the Dr. Michelson. Yes, she's an assistant professor of applied linguistics and French at Texas Tech University in the United States. She earned her doctorate in second language acquisition and teaching at the University of Arizona in 2015. Specializing in multiliteracies approaches to foreign language teaching and learning. Her research is anchored in the intersections between human action and experience and cultural text, with a particular focus on pedagogical and technological innovations in foreign language teaching and learning that call explicit attention to culture, affect identities, and ideological discourses. So we are really happy to have Dr. Michaelson tonight with us, and I would like to hand it over to her. So the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Özge, and thank you, Osman, for your invitation. And can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Very nice.
Sezen's talk was such a wonderful beginning talk, and I think you'll see a lot of complementary points between what we're talking about tonight. So what I'm going to do is talk about how multiliteracies pedagogies can be leveraged for teaching language and culture holistically. And first, we're going to talk about what I see and what have been identified in some of the literature as problems with culture teaching. Then we'll look at what multiliteracies pedagogies are and why they're well suited to integrated culture and language teaching. And then finally, we'll look at some examples of texts and tasks in service of these goals. So to start, what are some of the problems with the way culture is taught sometimes in foreign and second language educational contexts? First, culture is often taught separately from language, with a view that culture knowledge is transferred through literary works. Second, culture has sometimes been taught as a catalog or an inventory of behaviors, or as lists of objects of difference. These kinds of approaches tend to treat culture as static or monolithic collections of facts or knowledge, and can lead to stereotyping, as we saw earlier. So a lot of scholars have argued for teaching culture as a relational process, whereby we come to terms with our own positions as culturally situated subjects in all acts of communication and social life. In order to successfully interact within society, we must develop culture general and culture specific skills and strategies for interaction. And I've seen a couple of questions come up in the chat about the relevance of teaching culture specific skills. We need both. We need both. So another way that culture has been described as a relational process is through what Claire Cronch calls linguistically mediated membership into a discourse community. So what is a discourse community, and what is meant as culture as being in discourse communities? First of all, it's important to recognize that within discourse communities, there are common values and ways of expressing the world. So through language, through our textual representational practices, and there are normative cultural practices and conventions and ways in which these practices are interconnected with language. And we'll see some of these examples through the texts that I've selected in a little bit. But it's important to remember that discourse communities are not monolithic entities that always map onto national communities, and that we can be members of multiple discourse communities. Our identities are always implicated in our discourse community memberships. Some of these are chosen, such as our professions or organizations we belong to. Some of these are given, growing up in a particular family, village, national context, etc. If you want a really good overview historically of how culture has been viewed, I highly recommend this edited volume by Joe LoBianco. This is 2003 from his edited book, Teaching Invisible Culture. And I'll be happy to share the PowerPoint slide and references after the talk is over. But this is a wonderful introduction. I've just taken from his introduction and kind of mapped it onto a visual that's easy to read quickly. So he offers what I think is a very useful snapshot of these different traditions. So we've taken in foreign language teaching over the decades, centuries, we've taken ideas from educators, poets, literary critics, anthropologists, social critics, philosophers, and these different notions of culture have given rise to particular teaching implications. So if we view, for example, culture as a catalog or an inventory of behaviors, then we might be doing comparisons of self and other, looking at lists of objects of difference. If we see culture as patterned human interaction, we might be focusing more on signs and meanings, etc. So more present day, if we see culture as sets of practices, as Brian Street, who's an anthropological, who takes an anthropological approach to literacy, then our classroom practices might look more like putting an emphasis on literacy, events, and practice, and not culture as being, but culture as doing. So doing communication. These historical beliefs and practices, many of which are still very much a part of our teaching and learning context today, have led to ideological views of language, teaching, and learning. And I'll share a couple examples from students over the years. These are anonymous. But here's feedback from a student after a French course where we did an integrated language and culture lesson. Spend less time on the cultural part of France and more time on the language itself. I know that it's important to know about Francophone culture, but it got in the way of actual language learning. Could have spent time going over grammar, which is very difficult. Here's another example. Please consider including less cultural aspects. I did not sign up for this class to learn about France or Mozambique or whatever. I signed up to learn French, the language. So as you can see, it gets quite strong, and it is ideologically laden against the teaching of culture or the learning of culture in a foreign language classroom. So these ideas come from, of course, prior experiences of learning. They are perpetuated by our materials, our textbooks, our own discursive practices in the classroom. They're perpetuated by a number of sources. But it doesn't have to be this way. We don't necessarily have to have this false dichotomy between language and culture. We can teach both in the classroom. So here's where multiliteracies pedagogies can come in. Let's talk first about what this is. Many of you might be familiar with this work, and so I'll give a very, very brief overview and refer you to some other resources. And if there are more questions about this in the Q&A, I'm happy to share more. The first question that I think always helps me in approaching theoretical concepts, especially when it comes to teaching, is to ask whether we're talking about an approach, a method, a theory. Are we talking about techniques? Multiliteracies has really been considered all of these. So first I'm going to talk about why and how it's an approach with then corresponding frameworks and techniques. So the term multiliteracies can be traced back to a group of scholars who called themselves the New London Group. And these were scholars and educationalists from applied linguistics, social semiotics, communication studies, who met in the town of New London, New Hampshire, in 1994 to discuss changes in communication landscapes and the ways that pedagogies would need to adapt to teaching literacies relevant to new forms of communication. So they authored a seminal article after this meeting. This is called The Pedagogy of Multiliteracies, Designing Social Futures. And here are all of the authors of that original group. And they outlined what have come to be known as multiliteracies. They saw multiliteracies as an appropriate term to describe the new kinds of literacies that would be needed for success in a world with ever disappearing boundaries and borders, increased mobility, increasingly diverse communities in terms of cultural and linguistic backgrounds, and a new knowledge economy that would require flexibility, innovation, and collaboration within flattened organizational structures. So, this was 30 years ago. That was very, very forward-looking. This is the world we're living in now and have been for quite some time. So what do they mean by multiliteracies? Literacies are plural. They are referring to multimodal resources, the different resources for meaning making. the multiple ways that meanings can be made. So we all have different options and design choices that we can make in a communication situation, and the multitude of different social histories and backgrounds brought to a communication situation, and particularly among students. So some core concepts within the multiliteracies approach are this metaphor of design. So design is an active process. We draw upon our available design resources. So these might be linguistics, social, cultural, grammar, images, cultural knowledge, genre knowledge, personal experiences. Available designs can encompass a wide range of things. We use specific language forms based on our identities, our knowledge of discourse community norms, our intentions, what we think sounds good, and perhaps some social communication conventions of the communication context. So they also proposed the principles of multimodality, and this is sort of the iconic wheel. It's very hard to read on this slide, but if you look at that 1996 New London Group publication, you'll see it much more clearly. But they were very clear that meaning making is always multimodal. So logocentric approaches to communication are really not enough for dealing with the way that meanings are made in our everyday lives. So to sum up, various theoretical positions underlie multiliteracies, various philosophical or epistemological positions, I should say. So the fact that social roles and identities are always at work in processes of meaning making, the fact that meaning making is multimodal, and the fact that meanings are designed based on available resources. So now let's look at a couple of aspects of different frameworks that have been proposed. Sometimes you hear people talk about the multiliteracies approach or the multiliteracies pedagogy. I think for the most part, they're probably referring to either Cope and Colantzis or the original New London Group proposal. But I like to call multiliteracies pedagogies plural for the same reason that Sezen was talking about languages as plural, English as plural. There is not just one way to do these things. So what I want to say before looking at these frameworks is that working with texts is very central to a multiliteracies pedagogical approach. So as we look at this framework, what we're looking at are heuristics for aiding students in the interpretation and the production of texts. So the original New London Group proposal it consists of what are called the 4 curricular components. Each act involves a different kind of engagement with text. Their original terms are somewhat opaque. Bill Cope and Mary Colantzis renamed these 4 curricular components the knowledge processes, and these map onto experiencing, conceptualizing, analyzing, and applying. They call these ways of knowing. So in other words, how can we come to know the meanings in a particular text? Through activities of describing, exploring, observing, connecting, we can begin to make sense of meanings. Through activities of classifying, extrapolating, hypothesizing, generalizing, we tap different knowledge processes as we explore relationships between designs, text designs, and its meanings. And we're going to do that shortly. Through activities of comparing, synthesizing, questioning, or critiquing, we look at underlying ideological messages, and we think about identities, authorship, audience, purpose. And then in applying, we compose, construct, demonstrate, and design as we appropriate our existing available design resources, any newly encountered design resources, and assemble these into a new text. So let's take a look at how this works. As I mentioned, multiliteracies pedagogies are inherently text-based. Of course, meaning making and communication are not solely anchored in text-based processes, and this has been challenged quite often in the scholarship. But many of the frameworks anchor interpretation of texts as a precursor to successful intercultural encounters. So texts are not just sources of linguistic knowledge and cultural facts, but are representations of how culture is created and how it functions. It's important to look at texts as elements in cultural networks, not just as isolated forms of information, for example. So one concept that's helpful to understanding text is genre. So we can think about genres as cohering linguistic and semiotic and social processes through patterns and conventions, and orienting us to, as writers or as interpreters, to potentials or possibilities in terms of language use. So let's look at some genres and text types. You might be familiar with all of these. And if you think for a second, you might be able to think of an example of all of these that you've seen recently. Some of these are texts that we encounter, text types that we encounter in our everyday lives, some in schooling contexts, but they're not limited to our schooling contexts. So, all right, you ready to experience multiliteracies? I'm going to give you just a brief walkthrough of what some of the pedagogical acts of the Köppen-Calantzis Learning by Design framework might help us do with a series of texts that are part of a cultural network of discourses. Okay, so what I want you to do is just think for a minute. You don't have to type anything, but just think to yourself. We're going to start with the known. So what do you imagine when you think of okay, now we're going to experience the new. So with all of your ideas in mind, and I realize that wasn't enough time to think about all of the things that you probably associate with home, and maybe you thought of this word in other languages that are close to you. But as a precursor to working with text, this is something you might do with students. So now we're going to experience the new. We're going to see different ways that home is talked about in cultural texts, ranging from the personal to the public. Okay, so in example 1, I'm just going to let you read it silently for a minute. Okay, so now we're going to do, again, part of the learning by design, conceptualizing by theorizing or analyzing functionally. And this really belongs to both the conceptualizing and analyzing. So you probably have an intuitive sense of what genre you were looking at, but we could call this a description, right? You might have had that sense right off the bat without doing an analysis. But if we did an analysis, we could probably support our conjecture with even just a simple analysis of sentence structure. So most of the sentences begin with either a noun or a pronoun and a verb, right? Noun, phrase, verb, etc. So as we look further, we've got this subject-verb complement structure. It's not personal necessarily. There aren't any sort of I, you, we pronouns there, but there are quite a lot of adjectives for descriptions. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Take a minute to read this. Do you have a sense of what kind of genre this might be? If you said description, I agree with you. And there might be multiple ways to think about this, but conventionally, I think we could call it a description. But look how different it is from the first example. Looking at the salient features of this text, we've got a lot of nouns: neighborhood, parade of home, unique features, lots of big windows. Look at the sentences. They begin with beautiful, beautiful, lots, spacious, very. We don't really have very many what we might call complete sentences, the kinds of sentences that prescriptive language teachers might call incorrect or grammatically incorrect. In fact, this is conventional for this particular genre, which we'll see in just a minute. This is the only full sentence that conforms to what we might have learned as second language learners or first language learners at any particular point, that you've got to have a subject, you've got to have a verb, you've got to have a complement. This is the only one in this text, and yet this is a text that's recognized as a legitimate form of participation in a particular social practice, which you might be anticipating, but we'll look at that in detail. Example 3, take a minute to look at this. So this you might recognize as an appeal. What is it that characterizes this as an appeal? Or what is particularly patterned about this text? If we look at the pronouns, we've got you, we. So this writer is making a relationship between themselves and the interlocutor who's named directly through the second person pronoun you. We also have, if we look at content words here, secured, worried, intruder, burglaries, stronger, worrisome, etc. Example 4. Now these texts are getting increasingly longer and potentially less familiar, so you may not have time to do a full read, but that's okay. If you recognize this as a testimonial, let's look at how these play out. So we've got, again, first person pronouns, our, we, it's pluralized now. We also have a direct relationship with an interlocutor, although it's, actually I should say it's more indirect, right? You had to lift them up. It really means we had to lift up the bedroom doors. So we see then a positive testimonial. I received an email about a call from the program. I was accepted into the program. It has something to do with homeowners. And if we look at the keywords there, we also have actually some resonances with some of the discourse of the previous text, worrisome, problems, issues, etc. Okay, last one. So you might have been able to see that this is an informational text. What characterizes an informational text? How and why is this different linguistically from some of the others? If we look at the what I think is the key feature here, we've got nominalizations, home ownership rates, the foreclosure crisis, delayed household formation, ownership rates, lack of access. We've got a lot of noun phrases or nominalizations. We have the subject of a sentence being a verb phrase, living in high poverty neighborhoods has. This is your subject. So we've got a very advanced grammatically advanced text that contains quite a few nominalizations and as we can see is quite different from the other texts. All right, so let's analyze critically before we wrap up and synthesize. Can we draw any conclusions about patterns of linguistic choices and textual genres? And what are some of the discourses about home evoked by this ensemble of texts? And by the way, I forgot to mention in the beginning, I grew up in Bay Village, Ohio, outside of Cleveland in the United States. I currently live in Lubbock, Texas. And so my home cultural context is an American, a US American context. And so I picked texts that for me are representative of discourses that are quite often heard and circulate in everyday conversations. So if you were to answer the question home is, what might that give rise to? So think of some messages and ideologies about what home means, what are the important elements of a home, etc. Who is allowed to have one, and things like that. So if we are going to look at language, we could say that description, at least in this case of the examples that we saw, is characterized by a lot of adjectives and sentences that tend to be subject verb complement type constructions. In the appeal, we saw a lot of second person pronouns, right? The direct naming of an interlocutor. In a testimonial, we saw a lot of first person pronouns, we, I. And finally, in the informational text, we saw a lot of embedded clauses, prepositional phrases, nominalizations. Looking at cultural messages and discourse systems, there are two very clear messages that I see. And this is something that we could lead our students to try and discover through walking them through slowly an analysis of grammar, an analysis of vocabulary, an analysis of all of the different design choices. So message number 1, homes should be safe, cozy, and comfortable. Message number 2, it's better to own than to rent, as indicated by these various indications of equating rental properties with being unsafe or being insecure or dirty, etc. So We can certainly start with the linguistic analysis. We could even do the linguistic analysis second if we were to do this in a classroom context. But these, of course, are all examples that I've taken out of their original context. If we put them back in, we have many, many more resources and schematic resources, background knowledge with which to interpret these texts. So I'll show you very briefly. We might have guessed, if you're familiar with The Hobbit, that text number 1 was from The Hobbit. Number 2, this text with no full sentences, if you will, was from a real estate ad, very typical. Text number 3 was a letter. So if we already can help our students contextualize the genres by showing these texts in their original habitats, that helps orient to the kind of text they might be reading conventionally. Example number 4 is from an organization called Habitat for Humanity, helping folks become homeowners who might not otherwise have had an opportunity. And then the final text comes from an organization that is all about creating sustainable, healthy neighborhoods. Okay, are these all the discourses about houses in a North American context? No, but these are quite familiar familiar discourses and messages, and we can help students gain access to them through an ensemble or a network of texts. So we haven't talked very much about the multimodal part of multiliteracies, but I'll conclude just by giving you some resources for helping students interpret texts through all of these approaches. So selecting texts, Paisani 2005 has some great tips pulled from other researchers. Texts should treat topics that are familiar to beginning language students so that they might easily access background knowledge, or sometimes background knowledge could be supplied. And to be appropriate, a text should contain enough fresh or unknown elements to give the learner frequent opportunities to hypothesize about their meaning, but have repeated elements to allow them to test these hypotheses. These are 3 books that I highly recommend and that I go to when I'm looking for techniques for how to select instructional activities or pedagogical acts that are related to the interpretation of texts and the production of texts. Many of these have accompanying websites or templates for staging interpretation. This comes from Paisani, Allen, and Dupree, so this middle book here. And then some other frameworks for multimodal analysis that I recommend come from Alvarez Valencia, Serafini, and Unsworth. And many of you might know others as well. So to conclude, I'd like to thank you for listening to this presentation, and hopefully I've left enough time for all of us for questions. So thank you very much.
And thank you very much for your great talk and presentation. Thank you. And probably you will see all other thank yous in the chat box. Yes, for the first presenter and for the second presenter. While you can enjoy reading the comments, I would like to do some remind some stuff about our social media accounts. If you want to follow us on our social media accounts, you can get updates. And we will really appreciate your feedback for the upcoming webinars and the projects. So you can find the link in the chat for feedback. If you want to fill in the form, you can find the link. So now I would like to move to Q&A session before we finish. And I think I can ask to both presenters at the same time, maybe because the first question is really related to the topic of maybe both of our presenters today will have an idea about the first question. So we have a lot of great questions actually, and if we don't have enough time to cover them all, feel free to email our presenters. Maybe they will be very happy. I'm sure that they will be very happy to reply your questions via email as well. But I will try my best. So let me start with the first one. The first one is can we achieve the teaching of language and culture through semiotics? What appropriate framework theory can we adopt for this? So do you want to contribute anything? Like, yes, maybe with your camera and sound on. Yeah, that's better. Thank you. So what do you think about like teaching language and culture through semiotics? What appropriate framework can we adopt as a teacher?
I'm happy to respond to this question. I think these multi-literacies frameworks are quite helpful. And, you know, if we think of semiotics as really all sign systems, you know, we can have linguistic sign systems, we can have visual sign systems, gestural, et cetera, all those various sign systems that the New London group proposed initially. I think there is a lot of work and a lot of developing work for helping students interpret cultural meanings by looking at not just the linguistic, but also the visual. And so I think the frameworks I've shared are a great place to start for anybody that's looking for a place to get started.
Thank you. Yes. And do you want to add something, Sezen Hocam, or we can move to the the next one? So,
yeah, I think actually in my slide I use Michael Bayram's framework. Let me type it for you. Michael Bayram's framework can be used, and Kahru's again framework can be used. So I think they can make sense for you. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And then the second question is that, do you think that teaching English based on a foreign culture is going to help students learn and understand quickly, or like lead to misunderstanding and would be confusing in the end? So like teaching language based on a foreign culture, would it be helpful or like confusing for the students? Well, I think, yes.
I don't think that actually basing, you know, or let's say focusing on, you know, culture will be confusing for the language learners, because culture makes our learners, you know, be social. So language is interaction. And if you base your teaching on culture, then it means that you can promote your student to actually interact with other people. Because one day they will maybe study abroad, they will just go to other countries for, you know, as a tourist. So they will help it.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you. And
if I could just add one thing there, I think that the Köppen-Kalantzis learning by design framework is really nice because it starts with the known, right? So we can get our students to experience what they know first, and then we can kind of gradually move them toward the new, and we can help them make relationships between what's new and how that might be familiar to them. We have to sometimes help them find connections, and we ourselves might not even always be the experts, right? We can learn from our students and what they're discovering in terms of the newness of different cultures that might be related to the languages that we're teaching.
Yes, definitely. Yes, thank you. And then the next question is like, in some cases, when learners make mistakes, and when they are being corrected, they sometimes like put up some sort of attitude and say, it's not my mother tongue, so helping such learners become difficult. Like, what shall we do? Like, what's the way out? So do you want to like, contribute to this question to deal with some like negative attitudes in a way?
Yeah, actually, once upon a time, I had such students. I worked in Sakarya, and people and the children, let's say, my students say that it's not my mother tongue, and so why do I care about their cultures? But actually, I taught them to become a human. We are all humans, and actually, we are just, you know, made of blood and bones. So that's the thing. Yes, you can be Indian, you can be Mexican, but you are a human being. Yes, at the first time, yes, they object to you. There can be some kind of objections, but after some time, they can be, you know, used to your own style, actually. This is the culture that you create, or that you should create This is the atmosphere of the classroom.
Yes, true, definitely. Yes, I think I have a kind of similar experience as well. Yes.
Yeah, and if I can play off that, what Sezen just mentioned, I mean, it really is about using language in social contexts, right? This is how I see it too. And there are expectations, right? There are certain contexts where accuracy is really important. Other contexts where accuracy is not important. It's just about comprehensibility, or it's about doing something else. And you know, I always thinking about different text types. Real estate ad is maybe only something that some people encounter, but you know, how many of us have booked an accommodation somewhere? So we've looked for some kind of description of a house on Airbnb or some other kind of home exchange website. If I see a typo in those descriptions of the homes, I don't want to go there. I don't trust the person who is hosting that house. It makes it look unprofessional, right? But if I'm reading somebody's cooking blog and they're telling me how to cook a quiche, and I see a typo, I don't care, because the recipe looks good, the pictures make it look good, maybe they included a video, right? So I think it depends on the social contexts in which we're using language and the different conventions. And those are going to vary from context to context too.
And yeah, I can see in the comments that like some teachers like agree what you both have said. Yeah. And as we run out of time, so I would like to just ask one last question. And it says it is about like teaching like native English speaker accent. So although like the person who asked this question, like, yes, agree that like there shouldn't be one strict form about like native English speakers accent. So, but like, students who don't follow pronunciation rules end up not being able to understand or utilize the language's certain aspects, like expressing surprise or ask for clarification, therefore make listening them quite difficult. So don't you think there should be at least an effort to teach and learn a native English speaker accent? Yes.
Yeah, of course there should be a standard form of, you know, English. Actually, nowadays the textbooks include pronunciation of either British or American form. Actually, we are not talking about here teaching pronunciation according to a non-dialect system. We just say that the you know, activities should address culture. It's not the thing about, you know, teaching vocabulary or teaching pronunciation, teaching how to speak, intonation, etc. Of course, English has a specific system of intonation. Sometimes the first syllable is emphasized, sometimes the second, sometimes some words in a sentence, you know, are emphasized. And this must not change, because otherwise we cannot understand English. The English system can be distorted, the language can be damaged, can be distorted. Of course, there can be a standard system, but in a textbook, the activities should include international or intercultural aspects, intercultural dimensions. So the culture should not be just one-dimensional. I mean, the textbook should not just teach British or American culture. So that's the thing, actually.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, I can see in nodding, some nodding there. Yes. Do you want to add something? Yes. Thank you, Michelson.
No, I agree. I think it comes back to comprehensibility and conventions. I think you know, for spoken language, we need to have. We want to have immediate comprehensibility, right? Of course, in the moment we can negotiate if there's a misunderstanding, but yeah, so an attempt to produce sounds that will be recognized as, you know, part of that conventional meaning system, I think is really important.
Yes.
But it gets complicated with you know, our identities too, right? Like when I learned French, I really wanted to approximate native speaker sounds of French speakers in France because those were who I met. I'm trying to learn Spanish as a second language, and I don't, at this point, it doesn't matter to me. I want to say things that are going to be understood by the people around me. And I have no idea what kind of Spanish I'm ever speaking. In other words, where, what regional context that might conform to, and that's okay, right? So I think our identities and our interests and our purposes all get caught up in this too.
Definitely, yes, exactly. Okay, thank you very much. So you can see a lot of nice comments in the chat box. And yes, thank you very much for being with us tonight, Dr. Arslan and Dr. Michaelson. And it's really such a great pleasure to have you with us tonight. And I would like to just do some reminders for our participants that don't forget to check your spam box, because your certificate can be there and all the certificates will be sent in 1 week. And for the updates, you can follow our social media accounts, and the PowerPoint presentation will be on the project website after the webinar. And also please share your comments with us. You can give us feedback for the better or for the other webinars upcoming in the next month. So it's such a great pleasure to have you both. I would like to say thank you and good night to everyone. Looking forward to seeing you all for the next webinar.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.